In 2015, German newspaper Süddeutsche Zeitung was contacted by an anonymous source calling themselves John Doe, who offered to leak 2.6 terabytes of data spread across 11.5 million documents, which tied 140 politicians from more than 50 countries to 214,000 offshore companies in 21 different tax havens. John Doe did not demand any financial compensation, but it took Süddeutsche Zeitung and the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists a full year to decipher the encrypted files before the revelations could be made public. The revelations came to be known as the Panama Papers. Welcome to The Why in History. I am Ajay Kaul, and today we take a deeper look into the Panama Papers leak, the revelations, and the impact to global polity. For starters, to analyze this massive trove of data, the German journalists had to seek the help of the ICIJ, or the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists. The ICIJ is a global network of about 280 investigative journalists and over 140 media organizations spanning across 100 countries. It is based in Washington, D.C., but it has personnel in Australia, France, Spain, Hungary, Serbia, Belgium, and Ireland. And the Panama Papers investigation was the result of a collaboration effort between Süddeutsche Zeitung and the ICIJ. And the trove of these documents were leaked from a Panama-based law firm, Mossack Fonseca. And Mossack Fonseca's services include incorporating companies in offshore jurisdictions, such as the British Virgin Islands. It administers offshore firms for a yearly fee through a global network of 600 people working in 42 countries. In April of 2016, the Panama Papers exposure saw its first political casualty, the Prime Minister of Iceland, Sigmundur Gunnlaugsson. It happened 2 days after the Panama Papers exposure that revealed his connections to an offshore shell company. And this did not happen voluntarily. It happened after demonstrations called for his resignation. The papers revealed that Gunnlaugsson and his wife Anna had purchased an offshore company, Vintris, in 2007, which later invested millions in Icelandic bank bonds. This means that after Iceland's financial crisis in 2008, Gunnlaugsson was a creditor for 3 major Icelandic banks, and at the same time, he was negotiating deals between the banks and foreign creditors. And the more interesting thing is that just 1 day before a law was passed in Iceland that would have required the PM to declare his holdings, he sold this offshore company to his wife Anna for $1. A career comedian, Volodymyr Zelensky, became the president of Ukraine after promising to wipe out corruption in his country. And his case became more solid after the Panama Papers revealed that his predecessor, Petro Poroshenko, had set up a secret offshore company in the British Virgin Islands in August of 2014. And this was set up around the time when the Ukrainian troops were being wiped out in a bloody battle with Russian troops and pro-Moscow rebels. And the irony around all of this is that during his election campaign, Poroshenko had vowed to divest himself of his extensive business interests. He had promised to wipe the slate clean and just focus on the well-being of the nation. Also around the same time, the Ukrainian government was trying hard to prevent the use of offshore companies since the tax evasion was costing Ukraine close to $11.6 billion a year in lost revenues. So how does Mossack Fonseca operate, and what really are shell companies? Mossack Fonseca basically registers these companies in tax havens on an industrial scale. And most of these companies exist just on paper with no offices and no employees. And that is what is meant by a shell company. It exists only on paper, and the only asset they have is a bank account. These shell companies are registered in offshore jurisdictions, and these areas offer tax-free conditions. And beyond that, there are very low public disclosure requirements, meaning they don't have to disclose who the shareholders are, directors, etc. All they need is the name of a beneficial owner. And talking of tax havens, more than half of the companies incorporated by Mossack Fonseca are registered in the British Virgin Islands. The cost of setting up a shell company varies from about $200 to $2,000, and all you have to do is provide some identification documents and disclose the type of business the company will be used for. And the most popular selections are investment and wealth management. So we may get the impression that free markets probably facilitate the transfer of money into offshore accounts. Well, that's not true, because another person named in the Panama Papers was none other than Chinese President Xi Jinping's brother-in-law, Deng Xiaogui. And along with him, others named included Li Shaolin, the daughter of former China Premier Li Peng, and Li Xingput, the son-in-law of Vice Premier Zhang Gaoli. Xi's brother-in-law Deng was the director of two offshore companies, one of which gained the rights to a seal used by Chinese businesses to validate documents. And Premier Li Peng's daughter and her husband were connected to an offshore company that profited from importing heavy European machinery into China. There was one major difference, though, in the response between China and the rest of the countries we talked about so far. True to its reputation, the Chinese government ramped up the censorship of the Panama Papers, blocking most online and broadcast references to the Panama Papers investigation. So is Mossack Fonseca the sole entity that is managing all these accounts? Not really. Offshore accounts cannot be prospering without the involvement of banks and other financial institutions. And in case of the Panama Papers, one bank that is mentioned most often is HSBC. It appears that HSBC lobbied on behalf of Syrian dictator Bashar al-Assad's cousin, Rami Makhlouf, to help him keep his Swiss accounts open while the war in Syria intensified. And just for information, Makhlouf's family controls an estimated 60% of Syria's wealth, and Syria has been subject to US sanctions since 2008. But to be fair, HSBC has been involved in such controversies in the past. In 2015, it paid $43 million to settle a case related to Swiss leaks, which alleged that the bank had helped clients hide money in secret Swiss bank accounts. And in 2012, HSBC reached a $1.9 billion settlement with the Justice Department, which had accused HSBC of doing business with terrorists, drug cartels, and rogue nations like Iran, which of course was just a slap on the wrist for HSBC. So where did the characters and the prominent players in the Panama Papers finally land? Well, for starters, the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, or the ICIJ, won the 2017 Pulitzer Prize for explanatory reporting for their expose on the Panama Papers. The Panamanian law firm Mossack Fonseca closed within 2 years of the release, under pressure from lawsuits and other global organizations. Ramon Fonseca and Jürgen Mossack are still reeling under lawsuits, prominent among them being the one related to crimes against the public economic order. Fonseca is pretty active on Twitter, where he often posts several times a day, touting conspiracy theories about the Panama Papers and COVID-19. The biggest casualty of the Panama Papers investigation was the then Pakistani Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif. The Panama Papers revealed his family's offshore assets, and that sparked widespread protests and official probe into Sharif's finances. Ultimately, Sharif was disqualified from the prime ministership, sentenced to 10 years in prison, fined $10.6 million, and banned from holding public office for life. Well, he went to the United Kingdom on medical bail and never returned. So technically, he's in self-imposed exile in London. But there are rumors that Sharif may soon return to Pakistan to bolster his political party, which needs him desperately as the general election is around the corner. And if he does return for the elections, it is going to be interesting because another former Pakistani Prime Minister, Imran Khan, is in prison serving a sentence. Some of the most complex connections unveiled by the Panama Papers investigation centered around the accounts held by some close allies and friends of Russian President Vladimir Putin. Money that some people feel belonged to Putin himself. A number of Putin's close confidants were flagged in the Panama Papers, including classical cellist Sergei Roldugin, a childhood friend of Putin. Roldugin was a major figure in a network that moved over $2 billion through banks and shell companies. In early 2023, Swiss prosecutors charged 4 banking executives for their role in helping move millions of these dollars and failing to flag warning signs about the likely true owner of these accounts. The bankers were finally convicted and fined hundreds and thousands of Swiss francs. And what about the source of the Panama leak, the tipster John Doe? John Doe says that he still lives in fear, especially from the Russian government, which was called out several times in the Panama Papers. But he seemed happy about the fact that there had been subsequent journalistic collaborations of a similar scale to expose global political corruption. Subsequent journalistic collaborations? What is he talking about? Well, he's talking about subsequent leaks that happened in the following years. The Paradise Papers in 2017, which exposed about 1.4 terabytes of data, and the biggest of them all, the Pandora Papers in 2021, which exposed 2.94 terabytes worth of data. And the Panama Papers leak did have the necessary impact with respect to financial reform. In Panama itself, for example, the government has made it mandatory for law firms to identify and verify the ultimate beneficial owner that they are working with. And it has required the Panamanian tax authorities to share tax information of foreign citizens with their country of origin in business dealings with Panama. The British Virgin Islands, which has been most mentioned in the Panama Papers, passed a 2017 law that requires offshore service providers to report the real owners of companies to the island's authorities. So, with all these laws coming in, did the offshore tax evasion stop? Not really, if we look at the leaks from the Pandora Papers. The Pandora Papers, though, are different from the Panama Papers because here the focus is more on hiding money and property rather than evading taxes. Hiding money and assets. How is that different from tax evasion? Well, one helps the other, but the primary purpose of hiding the asset is not tax evasion, but putting on a cloak of privacy. For example, somebody may not want their inheritance to be contested, so it's best to hide it. Or sometimes it's just safety so that people don't know that you're filthy rich. And the best example of this is Jordan's King Abdullah II, who secretly owned 14 luxury homes in the United Kingdom and the United States, worth more than $106 million in total. And these include homes in Malibu, London, and Washington. And the reason he probably wanted these properties to be kept a secret is because Jordan is among the top recipients of foreign aid, receiving more than $1.5 billion in aid and military funding from the United States alone. And once again, Russian President Vladimir Putin has a mention in the Pandora Papers, though not directly. He is indirectly linked to assets in Monaco, including a home acquired by a Russian woman who is reported to have had a child with him. Once again, the core variable at play here is anonymous companies. Companies that are not required to identify their owners. And in simplistic terms, that would be trusts. So the rich can safely secure their assets under a trust. And a surprising new name emerged in the Pandora Papers with respect to a trust haven. And it's right here in the United States, South Dakota. With all the limelight on the international tax havens post the Panama Papers, money suddenly started flowing into trusts within the United States. And according to a 2020 report, South Dakota's trust industry now holds an estimated $367 billion in assets. And all of this has happened because of the state's aggressive drive to attract money by shielding trust owners' assets from foreign governments, taxes, and even former spouses. More than 200 US trusts appear in the Pandora Papers data, sheltering at least $1 billion US. So is there any light at the end of the tunnel? Any hope that the rich will be able to pay their fair share of taxes based on true income? As indicated earlier, the true issue is the complicity of the banks and the financial institutions in this whole cycle. The rich have easy access to a network of professionals to help them. And in this scenario, the banks and the financial institutions are the ready, available, and obliging facilitators. And it is on that note that we end this section of the program. On to the quiz section. Question from the previous episode. In May of 2023, which prominent AI scientist quit his job citing risks of unfettered development of AI? Geoffrey Hinton, known as the grandfather of AI, made headlines in May of 2023 after quitting his job at Google and citing the risks of unfettered development of AI. And Hinton's message was considered extra potent because in many respects, he made the breakthroughs that led to present-day AI. So the answer is C, Google's Geoffrey Hinton. Question for the current episode. What movie did the Panama firm Mossack Fonseca tried to block from releasing on Netflix since it was inspired by the Panama Papers? Was it A. The Polka King starring Jack Black, B. Bank of Dave starring Joel Fry, C. Rising High starring David Cross, or D. The Laundromat starring Gary Oldman and Antonio Banderas? Once again, what movie on Netflix did the Panama firm Mossack Fonseca try to block from releasing since it was inspired by the Panama Papers? Was it A. The Polka King starring Jack Black, B. Bank of Dave starring Joel Fry, C. Rising High starring David Cross, or D. The Laundromat starring Gary Oldman and Antonio Banderas? The answer will be provided in the next episode. That's all we have in the current episode. The next episode is going to be the 75th episode, so to mark that occasion, I'll take a look at the previous 74 episodes and try to summarize what we have learned from history. Is there a template that history by and large follows and we can easily predict what's going to happen next? Let's see as I go back 74 episodes and evaluate any patterns that emerge from history. Till then, stay safe and keep exploring the why in history.